Hello. It's just a game, my mother used to say, when the Welsh rugby team was beaten by England, the old enemy. And those same words are used daily across America in a well-meaning but usually vain attempt to put that loss at baseball or hockey or basketball in some kind of perspective. Since when was it just a game, we true believers ask? And now with commercial spots during the Super Bowl costing $1 million and more, vast earnings for the big league players, whole industries devoted to the production and merchandising of officially endorsed goods, probably the last thing we can say about sport in America is that it's just a game. It's a serious business, and not simply in a commercial sense. In this series, we're trying to read the writing on the walls of the 1990s. And perhaps the very fact that so much money is being made out of sport demonstrates that the game too is a sign of our times. For it touches emotions and longings deep within us in a way that few other things in our culture can.
Sunday in Atlanta, Georgia, in the heart of the Bible Belt. And today we are witnessing something rather extraordinary, the day when the South, and in fact the Christian world generally sees as a day of prayer, a day when people flood into the churches. We have instead a vast pilgrimage from all over the country, I dare say all over the world, flooding into a kind of great cathedral of sport in Atlanta, the Georgia Dome.
For Brad Shaw, professor of anthropology at Emory University, at great sporting events like Super Bowl 28, there's a lot more going on than mere entertainment.
We normally think of a pilgrimage, a religious event, as a chance for people who live in the periphery and yet who worship something whose center is really somewhere else, to actually make contact, to be physically in touch with the place, a sacred center, a sacred home. If you were to look at the way people react and to their faces and to the kind of excitement that this brings, you could easily think that this was a religious moment, people coming to a site of a sacred event that's about to take place. If you were to ask most of these fans whether what they were doing was a religion, I think most of them would probably deny that, and I think that I think they might be right. On the other hand, they might have trouble denying it completely, because so much of the behavior attendant upon events like this is so hard to distinguish from religious events. If you were to take, for instance, a religious pilgrimage, whether it's to Mecca or a pilgrimage in India, or a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, I think you might find a similar set of emotions, a similar set of physical events of people flooding in. You'd find the commercialism surrounding it and the kind of tension between the kind of sacred event itself and the kind of whole apparatus of commercialism around it. You would find something that looks very, very similar. So it raises the question, I think, about how religious these events are, whether they are religion, are they a new American religion, a new religion of a capitalist society? Or are they just appearing to be a religion, but not really fulfilling that role?
Given the highly commercial nature of modern-day sports, it may seem strange to talk about their religious aspects. But writer and art historian Gregor Goethals believes that the very special role that place and time have in sports does indeed connect them in important ways with the sacred world of religion.
The stadium can be a sacred place, a place where families gather, a place where you see neighbors, and a place where you see strangers. But what unites them all is a particular loyalty to fans, a love of the game. It's probably one of those spaces that cuts across all kinds of barriers. And sacred in that sense is not necessarily a sense of the presence of some transcendent being, but the formation of what anthropologists might call a community, a kind of abstract sense of belonging to something larger than the individual self or individual family. Here, they could lose a sense really of individual identity and become a part of those who support the Braves or who support baseball or who lose themselves momentarily. One commentator I heard describe the stadium as a kind of retreat from reality. I think he was saying that all of us need to get out of the ordinary ho-hum time. When I'm in my automobile or the kitchen or the living room, life moves in a very linear way. But when you go into ritual space and ritual time, you enter a kind of, certainly a time, which has a beginning and has a middle and an end. It's very, very different from our ordinary. Our ordinary is of space or time, and therefore it is a retreat from the reality, that flux, that ongoing, continuing flux, which we can never stop. I think when one talks about the Super Bowl as a ritualization, or a ritual for many Americans, and indeed for all those who tune in through television, one sees here, well, one can approach it from many directions, but it is a repeated event. We look forward to it. It marks, in a sense, a time on our liturgical year in the secular world. We begin our season in the fall, following professional games, leading up to the playoffs, and finally here, this event, the Super Bowl, which becomes kind of the climax of the year, and it provides a seasonal kind of attraction, and we prepare for it. It used to be that we had simply the day itself and the game, but now we know, we have interviews on television, there are parties the night before, the supermarkets prepare special delicatessen food and fare for those who turn the watching of the Super Bowl even into a kind of feast or festival occasion. So ideally, one would like to be in a stadium like this, but when you can through television, we extend this kind of ritual space, and small groups can gather and take part in it.
Sport is a lot like the weather. Sport is something that everybody, that's always changing, it's always contingent, there's always a sense of drama about it. It's never quite the same, and therefore it can be picked up by people to transform their lives into periodic moments of incredible excitement. And I think this is where the parallel between sport and religion, I think, is the strongest. This is where you can really bring them together. I think that just as religion in modern society is based upon a kind of a setting aside of a certain day when all the normal humdrum rhythm of your life is set aside for something that's special and presumably very moving. So sport has the ability to do the same thing.
There is a tremendous challenge that we find in these sort of secular rituals because of the sense of adventure, the excitement one feels. I think often of the tendencies we have had, particularly in the Protestant denominations, to center our worship service primarily on sermons and the Word. And I think that, going week by week and listening to sermons without motion, without excitement, I can understand why some people might bolt out of the church and run home and turn on their television or go to the game to get a sense of adventure and excitement, something that draws them into an enterprise in which there is a massive sense of excitement. How to make religion, how to give religion, or how to return religion into the sense of adventure. I think this is one of the greatest challenges of the modern world.
So if it's true that Christian worship is in some sense in competition with the great media spectacles, what in the end is the difference between the rituals of sports and those of the Church of Jesus Christ?
Sport engages the excitement of people in a contest that in the end doesn't matter. And in the end, it's a contest which is safe. And so the other thing that sport does is it gives people a chance to experience the kinds of life and death issues that they read about in the paper that are terrifying for them, that are really scary, and it gives people a chance to experience those issues in a safe format. sort of like riding roller coasters or going into the snake house in a zoo or watching an accident from afar. It allows us to experience something in an exciting way that yet is safe from the terrors that we have when we read the paper about what can really happen to us, real life and death.
The Christian pilgrimage involves suffering, and I think this is one of the things that we want to touch on least in our own contemporary American society. Our rituals in the church, our pilgrimages involve some understanding of life as a sense of passion and death, and that we're in some kind of in-between period. We can't go back to origins, and we really don't know what is ahead. And as a Christian, we deal with the mystery of our origins and the mystery of a beyond. And central to the Christian faith is something that we all shy away from, which is suffering and the mystery of suffering. And I think that in the most profound Christian rituals, one can get that sense of rebirth or of moving through suffering to a kind of beyond. And I think this denial of death and denial of suffering is one of the more profound aspects of culture here that has been touched on by writers like Ernst Becker in his book, Denial of Death. He had a wonderful statement in there in which he was quoting Ortega y Gasset and said, "The only truth is the truth of the shipwrecked." And I think that that truth of the shipwrecked, the truth of one who has suffered, or the truth of one who is working out of suffering, is something that sets Christian ritual apart from the so-called secular rituals.
Pilgrimage, ritual, liturgy, can they really be talking about the same sports that give us so much innocent pleasure? Well, joining me to talk some more about the game as a sign of our times are two friends here at Columbia Theological Seminary. Catherine Gonzalez is Professor of Church History, and Ben Johnson is Professor of Evangelism and Church Growth. Ben, I know that you're a big sports fan, a big fan of the Atlanta Braves, maybe?
Yes.
What do you make of the analysis that Gregor Goethals and Brad Shaw put forward of sport in our culture?
Yes, I think sports are of a religious expression. It's a community that gathers all kinds of people, races, colors, backgrounds, who join in a common liturgy of clapping and shouting and pulling for their team to win. And I think perhaps if we were to pull the cover back and look more deeply into it, there is the struggle for good and evil. There's the white team, which is always the home team with the light jerseys in football, and the dark team that wears the dark jerseys. So we have the cosmic struggle between light and darkness, between God and the devil. And it's interesting that people structure their whole lives around this. For example, on Monday morning, people are thinking about who the Falcons are playing next weekend. And we begin to build up, and the church newsletter comes out on the sports page day after day saying, this is what's happening to the players in the contest, and this is what you can expect. And then when we get to the stadium, our team, the good team, is struggling against the wicked and evil team. And if we win, that adds a kind of cohesiveness to our lives, and we feel confident and victorious that we are kingdom people and we are winning the great battle ultimately against death. You do know that in Mexico, the bullfights are about that. It's about a struggle between life and death, good and evil. And all the clapping and cheering is really symbolic of the struggle with the ancient enemy of death. So I think it's ritualized in our sports experience.
Right. So you'd push that analysis really much further than either of those two would.
And what would you expect in a secular culture? If we are not centered and focused in God, and if we do not have the cross and the resurrection as symbols to lean back on or to look to explain the mystery of our existence, what do?
Catherine, one of the things that Gregor Goethals spoke about was this idea of sport as pilgrimage, particularly the big events of the calendar as a pilgrimage. Now, let's talk some more about that in a moment. But what did pilgrimage mean historically? I mean, most of us now have very little understanding of what that was all about.
Pilgrimages were clearly religious events that went to a place that was a shrine. I mean, it was a place that had relics, or a place that, well, generally relics, especially in the West. The West never went in for icons. It went in for relics, so that the way that you sort of touched the holy was the bones of the martyr, or at least some piece of clothing or something. But it was a sense that the relics were the way the holy reached into our life, and if you venerated the relic, or if you could touch it, in a sense, it was a touch of the holy. So that, particularly in the West, the sense of pilgrimages to shrines, pilgrimages to the place where the body of the saint was. You could move it. I think one of the interesting things is the way the sports events move. So it isn't always in Atlanta or always in Minneapolis or wherever. But you'd have to move the bones, which is why the medieval period you had so much trafficking in relics, because if you had the relic, then you got the pilgrimages. And if you had better relics, then more people came to your town. They had to stay in your inns. They had to buy your food. So that really was a sense of having, yeah, it was in many ways the same thing, but you had to have the best relics in order to do that.
What about this idea of making contact with the centre? People from the periphery coming to the centre?
Well, except the bones didn't always happen to be in the center, unless the center had more money to in a sense, buy the relics or discover them or whatever. But a small town could have a place of pilgrimage. I think you got a different form of pilgrimage when you had, say, visions of the Virgin Mary or something of this sort, where it was a place. You couldn't move Lourdes, but you could move the body of St. Peter, or you could move the bones of someone else. In that sense, it was movable. But a periphery might turn out to be a very important place of pilgrimage. There's no greater periphery than Santiago de Compostela. I mean, here it's the ends of the earth. I mean, it's really at the ends of the earth, and it becomes a very important pilgrimage shrine place.
When I think about this idea of pilgrimage, you think about the World Series, you think about the Super Bowl. These are once-a-year events that people come from the periphery to the center, to the place of holiness, to experience this renewal. And Victor Turner, who studied pilgrimages and retreats, said that you cross a threshold when you go on a pilgrimage, and that there you have a kind of anti-structure. That is, you don't carry anything with you into that defines you. And there you form a new kind of community, have a different kind of experience, and then you go back after the pilgrimage or after the retreat with a different vision of reality. I think that very thing happens. On Super Bowl Sunday, people come from all over. They're from the periphery. They don't know each other. There's nothing about it that binds them together except this one event. And so they go through the turnstiles. They form this congregation, and they are rooting for their team to win. In there, they're not connected personally with somebody 100 yards away, but they are together rooting for the same thing, and when their side triumphs, they walk away feeling we were victorious. It happened like I hoped it would, and I think their outlook the next week is affected by that. And I think it's a kind of secular, religious experience of some sort of transcendence that doesn't necessarily put you in touch with the holy, but it does put you in touch with something over and beyond yourself that gives a sense of unity to life temporarily.
The pilgrimages that you were talking about, Catherine, earlier, were medieval pilgrimages, and those were really rejected when the Protestant Reformation came along. Why was that?
I think because of the tie with relics. I mean, I think a lot of it was the tie with relics. The fact that if you went to a shrine, then in a sense you were praying to one of the saints. I mean, I think it was connected much more with the rejection of any intermediaries, the question of the role of the saints, praying to the saints, and also the whole issue of relics. I mean, so I think Protestants rejected that, partly they substituted simply the pure word for any of these material elements like bones or pieces of cloth, things of this sort. And the stress on pilgrimages went with it.
It seems to me that what's lost when you get rid of that whole idea of pilgrimage is a wonderful metaphor of the Christian life, that the Christian life is a pilgrimage, a journey. I'm thinking of a book like Pilgrim's Progress,
right.
John Bunyan. Do you think we need to kind of recapture some of this sense of pilgrimage?
I think we only recapture that when we recapture a sense of the holy. Now, the problem of trying to locate the holy in some place, I think for Protestants is still problematic. What concerns me, and in a sense goes back to what Ben was just saying, I think there's much more emotion, much more a sense of victory in a sports event than there is in church, even on Easter. Mm-hmm. I mean, that we have lost the sense that anything is happening. And I'm not sure that has to do with the Reformation. I think that has to do just with the character of modern life. But there is much more emotion in the sense that there has been victory in a Super Bowl game or even a daily baseball game than there is even on Easter Sunday. I don't think we have any sense that there is a struggle, that there has been a victory, that we are celebrating anything. So that the emotion is astonishing, I think, at a game, but it's rare. Even in churches that have much more sort of emotional services, I'm not sure the sense of victory is really all that strong.
I wanted to pick up on your suggestion that we might recover something like that. While I agree with Catherine that we do have difficulty trying to locate the holy in a place, if you go back to Turner's notion of retreat or pilgrimage, and I've done both of those, when you pull away from the ordinary and break out of your accustomed structures and find a place of silence, maybe the holy is not just in a place, but in every place. And that when we are able to pause and to be quiet and listen, we would say in the Reformed tradition to read the text, to pray the Psalms, to let our imagination be free by that experience, that it is possible to encounter the holy. And when that happens, then there's a refinement of our vision of who we are and what life is, what the world is about, and how we are to be placed in the world. So I would speak a strong word for that, whether it is an hour or whether it is a day or 2 or 3 weeks on occasion, that people might withdraw from the ordinary to be open to the transcendent.
Catherine, you said earlier about the loss of a sense of excitement at the great events, Easter and so on. Burned on my memory is a moment in 1977 when I was in theological college in Britain, and Liverpool were playing in the European Cup final that year, the first time for many years that a British team had got in. And when they scored the winning goal, I was up off my feet, shouting, roaring, with all the other students in the college, in the television room there. But one of the zealous students who happened to walk in at that point, I think probably from his prayers, he'd come in, saw us all leaping around and yelling and so on. He said to me, "You and Russell Jones, I want to see you leaping up and down like that in church next Sunday."
Right.
Now, and I think, you know, while I thought he was a rather a strange person, something about that has stayed with me.
Yes, that's exactly what I mean. And I remember a Christmas card I saw years ago that was a neon sign. It was a photograph of a neon sign on a building in Mexico. And it said, it was for Christmas, and it said, "Ole Jesus." And it was, you know, just this, the cry from the bullfight, but for Christmas. You know, that in a sense, the same excitement, and there's not that there usually, I think, in our churches.
But can churches really seriously compete with these incredible events that we see on our TV screens night after night, you know, which do appeal at an incredible gut level to that sense of excitement? Can we compete there? Should we even try to?
I don't think we should try to do that. But I think the sense of, if these are sort of secular paraliturgies, what is it that what we think of as the real liturgy is trying to say, and do we really understand it? Do we really believe that? I think is the more essential thing. I'm not sure it would be exactly the same form of of pilgrimage and ritual, but something of the excitement, I think, is what we're missing.
If it's true that there is this kind of ritual element in sport, what does it say about our contemporaries, do you think, and the kind of spiritual longings that are out there in our society that we often talk about it as a secular culture and all of that? What do you think it tells us about our times?
I think it says there's an enormous hunger out there, a hunger for belonging, a hunger for transcendence, a hunger for touching something that can shape and mold life in new directions. I think it is very evidently there. I want to respond to the other question also, and take the other point of view and say, yes, we ought to compete, but not compete in the bigness or in the superficiality or in the manipulation of emotion or in the mega bucks that are spent. We don't have that. We can't compete there. We need to compete in the quality of what happens when we come to worship. You know, those people on the field have put enormous energy in getting ready for this event. And I think that both clergy and lay, that is, leader and worshiper, when we are prepared and we're expecting, and these symbols that we have in church mediate to this community, God is here. I think that puts the Super Bowl in the shade. If Almighty God is in this community speaking and acting and touching lives and receiving worship, that's incomparable.
Well, the psalmist wrote a long time ago, how lovely is thy dwelling place, O Lord of hosts. My soul longs and faints for the courts of the Lord. And maybe what you're both saying is that there's somewhere or other we need to recover some sense, some sort of that excitement, of that looking forward to the praise and worship of God. My thanks to Ben Johnson and Catherine Gonzalez for joining me to talk about the game. Thank you for joining us too. In the next program, we're going to be talking about shopping, the mall as a sign of the times. I hope you can join us. But until then, goodbye.